is Everyday Expertise, and I'm Angela, and I'm here today with Zaire Lanier. She's a writer and narrative designer. She's currently working on her Afropunk fantasy horror comic, The Bone Herder, the Kickstarter for which was fully funded in 30 minutes and continues to grow. Hello!
Hello. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you for coming.
Anytime.
So, how did you get started with writing?
When I was younger, my school really emphasized English and language arts, and my parents, my mom said I talked a lot as a kid, and so she just like handed me a book and was like, "Hey, go do this." And I think writing was just kind of a natural extension of reading at some point. The first thing I ever remember writing was a little comic called Captain McMeow Meow, and it was about a cat that was a cop, and he like solved mysteries in his little town. So that's the first thing I remember writing.
That's cute.
Yeah.
Can you describe The Bone Herder for someone who's never seen it?
Yeah. So it's an Afro punk aesthetic, and I settled it in like pre-colonial Africa. And I used the ancient African civilizations like Carthage and Kush kind of as inspirations. Um, and I really wanted it to be a fantasy story centered around a not Western aesthetic and viewpoint, because those
Mm-hmm.
are, a dime a dozen. And people of color, especially Black people, I feel like are not often portrayed well in fantasy. So I just wanted to make my own little world. And Gail Simone was doing a comic school during the quarantine, and I got the two genres of fantasy and horror, and I came up with the idea of this almost like Witcher-esque like community of, they call them the bone herders,
Mm-hmm.
and they go and they basically go from village to village, and they almost like crime fighters, but the punishment is they cut you open, take your bones, bury them, and then the flesh folk come. They're kind of like an eldritch god type thing, kind of cosmic horror, and they take them into themselves. And then Cass, one of our main characters, is pulled into the story, and she doesn't want to do it, and she's forced to do so, and it's going to be about how she comes to terms with that and how it all plays out.
That sounds pretty cool.
Thank you.
So you describe your comic as Afropunk.
Mhm.
What would be like the main features of that as a literary genre?
I feel like Afropunk isn't something that's really easily definable. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's for me, it's been like you kind of know it when you see it. But Afropunk started out as like a kind of a musical genre, kind of
Yeah.
like a battle cry against the norm and the norms in the society. And I believe that a lot of it is just like self expression of yourself as a Black person.
Hmm.
I don't think you have to be Black to participate in Afropunk, but I do consider it a Black cultural thing. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
something that we embrace. Our differentness, our like embracing our own otherness in terms of sexuality, gender, your self-expression, and just going with it. Like there's an Afropunk festival that happens every year, and
Mm.
yeah.
That's pretty cool. Um, so what about the genre appeal to you for this particular story?
Um,
Like instead of say Afrofuturism or Afro fantasy, this you've specifically uh, categorized it as Afropunk.
I
What about
think
it meshed with your story that you were intending to write?
I think the three are really similar. I know people sometimes use them interchangeably. I
Mm,
think Afrofuturism tends to be uh, more uplifting. Like
mm,
what if the world 1,000 years from now was influenced more by those ideals rather than I feel like it's always like an empire and a resistance type thing when you think of like futuristic Western worlds, and what if it's more. Whenever I read Afrofuturism, it always comes off to me as more communal. Like it has its problems, but it's not
mm.
as centered on like a colonialistic feel to it. Um, and I think for this one, Afro punk I went with because of it's completely different from what we normally read in like Tolkien or any other of our like staples in fantasy.
Mm, that's cool. So the Kickstarter fully funded.
Yeah, it was really fun to watch. Like I had been so nervous like all morning, like my stomach was in knots. I felt nauseous and sick, and I pressed launch, and like my girlfriend was sitting next to me, and it was just taking off. It was just from zero, and we got our $5,000 funding in like 30 minutes, and then I think we hit our like final stretch goal was I was going to be able to pay the artist more, and then between
Mm-hmm.
that I was going to be able to make a full first issue, which was 24 pages, and I think we got that in like 2 hours, and I was just like crying like a little baby. I was like so excited. I didn't expect so many people to to want the project. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I was looking at other Kickstarter comics and I was like, oh my God, like for $5,000, it's 300 pages, a movie deal. Like, I'm exaggerating, but it was like,
Mm.
and I'm just sitting here with my little 8-page comic. So I was so nervous, but it happened and I'm really excited. And the team has been coming up with some like really cool stretch goals because we've gotten so far beyond what we thought we would. And
Mm.
so it's been really exciting to think about what we can do with this extra money in a way that doesn't like break the break
Break the bank.
bank too much. But yeah, it's really exciting, and it's gonna give us a chance to really like do something cool, I think.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
How much longer do you have in the Kickstarter?
We have until July 14th, I believe.
Mm.
So we we wanted to get 5,000, and right now, last I checked, we're sitting at almost like 37,000 almost. So it's who knows where it goes from here.
Mm. So you reached your last stretch goal. You've been adding more stretch goals, I believe.
Yeah, we're gonna announce them later today, kind of like an unofficial announcement, like a teaser trailer type
Mm.
thing. But and then on Tuesday we're gonna like fully like detail what we want to do because we have so much that we thought it would be really nice to expand the universe. So
Mm, that's cool. So will Boneherder be a standalone graphic novel, or are you planning a series?
we're planning a series. This right now is only the first issue, so it'll be between 24 or 30 pages, like any kind of standard comic book.
Mm-hmm.
But we're hoping that with the money that we make from this, we can set it aside so I can do the writing, the artists can get paid fair rates because I always believe in paying artists fair rates.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then we're hoping that we'll be able to do more issues after this because yeah, right now we don't have enough content for like a full saga-esque graphic novel volume.
Yeah. Do you intend to self-publish, or are you going to be looking for publishers or distributors?
Right now, I with all the attention it's getting,
Mm-hmm.
I I think I'm more likely to see if I could get published by a publisher just because
Mm-hmm.
it would be a much easier process.
Uh-huh.
Um, but if that doesn't happen, I'm totally fine with continuing to self-publish the series now, especially now that I know it has an interest. I can start
Mm.
doing like longer volumes, even if there's like more space in between. We could start really kind of taking the story off in that direction.
Well, you should certainly be able to have a good pitch. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
for
like
sure.
fully funded in 30 minutes.
Yeah, and I'm excited because I think it shows that there is a market for this type of story. Like
Mm-hmm.
people for not only for like an audience for it, but there are creators just like me who are just like hungry for chances. And if you give them to them, I really think the market and people who have been looking for that kind of representation will really come out for it. And even people who aren't, just black. I think a lot of people are hungry for something different in fantasy, and I think it's just a matter of time until it's flourishing more.
Oh, definitely. So, what's your biggest hope for the project?
Um, you mean like all the way to the end, or just this specific Kickstarter?
No, I think to the end for the
To the end,
the comic itself.
I my end goal is to kind of just present a fantasy story with black characters and characters of color that are fully fleshed out. Um, they're not stereotypes. They're not tokenized characters. They're not, there for like the funny sidekick. They're their own people. They stand on their own, and they have complex inner lives. They grow. They make mistakes, and I think that will be really important for people to see. And I
Mm,
also a part I've really been thinking about the story is just the like depictions of black family. And I want to show Cass's relationship with her mother and father throughout the story in the way of flashbacks, in a way that like resonates with people. Um, and I really want like a good depiction of a black family in fantasy.
that's cool. I think that's a great goal.
Thank you.
So, what's something you wish you'd known about writing before you began?
That it requires consistent hard work. It's
Mm,
not so often. I feel like people think writing and art in general is kind of like you get struck by inspiration and then you just like sit down and churn something out in a matter of hours, or like it's but sometimes it's like the words don't come but you kind of have to write it anyway.
mm,
And I think more people need to know that, because when you hit like a really hard slump, it feels like you're doing something wrong, and that you should be
mm,
able to just I should just be able to do it, but that's not the case. Like writing, it's like, if you say you want to run a mile under, I don't know, 7 minutes or something, you don't just like get inspired by it and you just suddenly do it. It's like you have to work yourself up to it. And I think writing's kind of the same way. It's a discipline, even if it is an art.
mm. No, it's very true. Do you have a favorite aspect of writing?
I always like when I start to get an idea. It feels very it's got so much possibility. And
Hmm.
I really like when I first have an idea and you just like have to get it down. And it's a very it's almost like a nostalgic feeling. Like I like when you're a kid and like you just want to go do something and it just like sticks in your head. And I feel like I don't get that as much as an adult in the same way. But I
Mm,
think writing, when I first get like an idea that really like sticks in my head, that getting it down or talking about it to other people is probably one of my favorite aspects. And of course when I finally get it down and someone says like, oh, this is really good, and you're like, oh yeah, thanks. Like thank you for validating what I do. It's, everyone likes that little bit of praise too.
are you an outliner or are you a discovery writer?
Uh, I want to be an outliner. Like it would make my life easier, but I always like start handwriting stuff and like making notes. But then by the end, there's something jotted down on this napkin, something is written over here on this envelope, and it's just like all over the place. So I, in my heart of hearts, I think I'm an outliner, but I'm actually a discovery writer for sure.
You know what? That's fine. People seem to think that it has to be like, either or, but really I think most writers are really like a mix of both.
Yeah, just a little bit of both. I respect people who outline their stories. It seems like I just can't imagine having something. I can't even write like a small short story completely mapped out. And
Hmm.
people will map out like 500-page novels, and I'm just like, how did you do that?
They're just really into control, I guess. Or they're very organized. They're those people who have lists for themselves probably for everything. So do you have a least favorite aspect of writing? Anything that frustrates you?
probably probably the imposter syndrome that comes with it. Like you'll spend a bunch of time working on a passage and you'll think it's really good, and then you'll read someone else's like something they wrote and you're like, oh wow, why am I even in this profession? I am absolute garbage. And it's just like a process that I think takes time to grow out of, and probably
Mm.
everyone struggles with probably all the time. Um, to some degree anyway. But yeah, definitely like when you're struggling with it and then you like do it and you're happy with it and then you see someone else that, oh, look what I did, and you read it and you're like, wow, that's just what am I what's the point, you know?
I think all creative people feel that way at every level, no matter how high they get. You know, I'm sure George Clooney has days where he's like, I'm sure there's better actors than me or something.
Right.
You know? All right. So when it comes to stress, obstacles, how do you cope with those things?
I don't know, a little bottle of wine every once in a while. Burrito. I usually will like seek out like affirming words or go cuddle with my girlfriend or something. Just try to. Sometimes it's good to just take a step back,
Mm.
uh, play some video games or something. But yeah, I think I normally just will try to take a step back and try to make sure stepping back doesn't turn into like 3 months of not doing anything on a project. But yeah, I think stepping back and refreshing yourself and looking at a project with new eyes is always really, really helpful.
So on that, do you get block?
Say that again?
Do you get block?
Oh, I get blocked not pretty often, but often enough
Mm-hmm.
where um just figuring out how things flow, because in your head you have such a like perfect vision of how it's gonna
Mm.
how to sound and how you're gonna describe it, and you want to get that vision as like to the reader as accurately as possible, and so it can be really frustrating when you can't quite figure out like how does this translate from this blob image in my head to like an actual concrete set of words that like will make sense to the reader, because in my head I can be like, oh, pretty lights, angels, heavenly music, and oh no, earth is on fire, but you can't write that in a paragraph on a sentence or in a story. It doesn't translate well.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Um, I think we've talked about quite a few things, but do you have any advice for people starting out? Any,
um
anything
i'd
you wish
say
people had told you?
I'd say don't compare yourself. And I kind of got into the community a little bit on Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm in the Midwest and I want to write for games and comics, but there aren't a lot of those kind of jobs in the Midwest,
Yeah.
especially if you're like a writer and not like a programmer or something like that.
Mm.
And I think starting out, I wanted to like be not friends with, but like interact with the people who were, like the people I admire, like the people who've had like 10-year long careers. They've made some of my favorite games. But I think you're a lot better off to seek out a community that's in the same place you are, because those are the
Mm-hmm.
people who like they understand where you are, they are where you are, and they'll recommend you for stuff. The number of times where we're like constantly exchanging jobs with each other, encouraging each other. Hey, read my little story, and hey, can you read mine? It's You're much more likely to form a community if you don't try to like sit at the feet of people who already have like a bajillion followers. It's a lot more rewarding, and then maybe naturally along the way they might like say, hey, you seem kind of cool. Let me introduce myself, or and then that's kind of how that works. It's a lot more organic.
Mm. That's cool. That's good advice. Definitely, yeah. If you're starting out, sort of participate. That's basically what
Yeah,
I'm saying. Yeah.
participate and be willing to listen. Like,
Mm-hmm.
don't come in with a certain amount of arrogance that I think some people have. Like, oh man, I'm like the reincarnation of, I don't know, Shakespeare or something. But for games, like, you have a lot to learn, and coming in with an open mind is and a good attitude is what will get you more notice, as opposed to like, I have nothing to learn and you can't tell me what to do, and
Mm.
I'm gonna go be the head person at the studio even though I've never done anything before.
How did you feel that what you've done so far for games is different from your comic writing, or not different? Do you feel that it informs your comic writing?
Yeah, I think they all have their. I mean, like, and to some degree, writing is writing, but for games, it's like are about interactivity. So like the player is doing something, they have no impact, or they have impact on the story. They can, they can go do a side quest, or they can just only focus on the main quest. They can not do any quests and go collect flowers or something. It's a completely different feel. Whereas comics is just, this is my story. These are the artists, and you're just gonna read it. And learning how to write in an interactive way for games is something that was very new to me, and still very new to me. But I enjoy the participation aspect of it. Like you're trying to make something that the player can like watch, read, play. It's just got a lot more facets to it.
Do you find I guess in the sort of even the technical sort of way of writing for a game as opposed to writing for a comic, and the way you have to describe things, do you find there's any difference, or is it overlap a lot?
I'll be honest, I haven't done a super ton with games yet. I've done like some Twine games. But for comics, you're like describing like, the panels, and then the panels, and trying to say like you only want like four to maybe 7 or 8 panels on a page, and it's kind of a balance of how am I going to balance my action, how am I going to get my point across, but like nobody wants to read like paragraphs upon paragraphs in a comic book. Like, you have to figure out how to get the points across much more succinctly, and that's kind of a good exercise because I've always done like prose, or if I do like a Twine game, I can add a lot more in there. But comics, it's like I've got 35 words max per panel type thing, and that's something that's kind of fun. It's like a little puzzle to try to figure out how to get everything to your artist without being overbearing, because you want them to be able to put their own spin on things too. Like, I picked your art style for a reason, and I want you to give you my general idea, but I don't want to be like, oh, like his hair is 2.5 shades too dark type thing,
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, Zaire, how can people find out more about you and your work?
I have a Twitter. It's Z Lanier 21. Super not original. It's just my first initial, last name, number 21. And then I have the Kickstarter itself has. I guess I could send you like the link, and you could put it under the video.
Yep, we'll have links to all of this in the description below.
Awesome, yeah. And the Kickstarter has like a synopsis about the world. It's got a lot of art on it. I try to be in contact with the backers, so I think it's been up for like 4 days, and I've already done 3 updates to keep everyone like up to date on what's happening. My Twitter has a lot of my like views on things. I've done a couple like AMAs, and I have a website that has my portfolio on it. If anyone hiring is watching this, but yeah, I just a few. Listen, Twitter, website, Kickstarter, where you'll most likely find any info that you would want about me.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Zaire.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. This has been Everyday Expertise. Bye.
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this interview. Be sure to share this video with friends and colleagues who may also enjoy this topic. Let us know your thoughts by leaving a comment below, or check the description for our social media. See you next time.